Champions of Psychology is meant as education and entertainment. It is not a substitute for medical advice or professional counseling. Discussion of mental health topics will be primarily rooted in research and the personal experiences and self-disclosures of the hosts. While we can provide generalized education and possible mental health resources, we cannot offer any recommendations, advice, or opinions for any specific persons, cases, or situations. We provide these resources and links at our sole discretion, but have not necessarily vetted or reviewed any resource. We assume no liability for the use of the information or resources on these sites, and we encourage you to use your own best judgment.
Hello, and welcome to Champions of Psychology, a show with the goal of openly talking about mental health and gaming presented by Codename Entertainment. I'm one of your hosts, Treavor Bettis, and joining me this week and every week is the amazing person who is...
Mitra Jordan. Why am I pointing to you as I say this sort of thing?
I went out like this. So like, yeah.
Hi. Obviously, I can't use my hands, which is to say, I should sit on them probably. That's an ADHD thing. No, I'm Mitra Jordan. I'm a registered clinical counselor working in Victoria, BC. I am thrilled to be part of this conversation, to in fact be making this conversation with Treavor, because this is something that's near to our hearts, and it's certainly something that comes up a lot in my practice. So talking about ADHD and our experiences growing up, whether you knew you were dealing with ADHD or not. So
yes, is and sometimes you can know you're dealing with it and not know you're dealing with it.
Right. So we will get to that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you want to say for folks out there in chat, hello, everyone. We, as usual, will be taking questions later in the show, but if you have any questions as we're talking, you can put them into chat with question, : and then your question, or also mod. Wait, is it? Yeah, no, Gabe. Gabe will grab those and put them into a little text doc, and we'll talk about them at the end of the show. Yes, thank you, Gabe. So yeah, I guess we should probably start things off with the very broad question of what is ADHD?
Definitely, because definitions are definitely useful. Okay, so I can't help myself. Honestly, this topic just makes me go tangent.
Yes.
Yeah, but to stay focused. So ADHD, and I'm going to read the descriptor from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual 5 revised, which is ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder defined by impairing levels of inattention, disorganization, and or hyperactivity / impulsivity. So it's not that people with ADHD, okay, actually back up. Neurodevelopmental disorders are disabilities associated primarily with the functioning of the neurological system of the brain. In other words, something about our functioning is challenged, and developmental refers to the fact that it's been around since childhood. From a diagnostic standpoint, you've had some ADHD symptoms since before the age of 12. So significant ADHD symptoms, otherwise you might fall short, as in be subclinical in terms of your diagnosis. So the thing is, this makes it sound like impairing levels of inattention means you have more inattention, but that's not actually what happens with ADHD. You don't have more inattention than anyone else.
I got all the inattention. It's all mine.
I see your inattentions and I take it for myself. The thing is, you don't have as significant of a capacity to stop the inattention. So it's the capacity to regulate that's the problem. So it's like, we all can have some inattention. We all can have impulsive thoughts. Oh, say, I want to buy that ridiculously expensive car that I can't afford, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, maybe just me, but I'm not even really that much of a car person, but I can get off on tangents. Have we met me? So it's the capacity to regulate the inattention. That's a big part of it, or regulate the impulsivity or the hyperactivity. So a big piece of working in terms of treatment with ADHD is how to create a little bit of a distance, a gap, if you will, between the thoughts and feelings, the impulses, if you will, and the action. So we want to create some space for regulation in the middle there. In other words, for a second, do I really want to do that or say that? Or do I really need to buy that expensive item, or do I, etc. So, and that about covers the issue. There aren't cures for neurodevelopmental disorders.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important one. You can do things that there are strategies to help you manage them. You can cope with your ADHD to the degree that maybe most people won't know you even are dealing with ADHD. And ideally, you take full responsibility for your ADHD and find ways to cope with it so that it doesn't impact other people in your life. The reality is that, of course, it's going to impact those closest to you. So it's going to impact your relationships. And we will get to that in the coming episodes, because this, folks, is a 3-parter.
Hey!
Yeah, we're excited. So, yeah. So we can talk about some symptoms, but Treavor, do you want to describe a little bit of your experience? Kind of, let's make it concrete for people.
Yeah, I mean, so we've talked about ADHD on the show before, but, we got new people coming through and everything, and they may not have heard our experiences with it. So to catch folks up, I was diagnosed with ADHD in, well, back then it was just ADD, because they were like, well, you're not too hyper, so we're just going to put you in ADD. These people are ADHD, and now it's all just together. But I was diagnosed with that in first grade. Because my first grade teacher pulled my mom's aside and was like, hey, you should get your kid checked out. And they did a diagnostic and diagnosed me with ADD, gave me Ritalin. That was about it. They didn't even explain to my mom like what any of it really meant. They just were like, he's going to be really hyper and he doesn't pay attention to anything and he's going to have difficulties in school. And so they just gave me Ritalin, and that just kind of knocked me on my butt through school. They also didn't explain to my mom, like, the whole, like, trying things out to see, like, hey, does the Ritalin work? During these times, you should give it to him here. So she did, what they kind of just said in the first place, which was he just needs it for school. And so I only took it during the day when I was going to school. I didn't take it on the weekend or at night because we didn't know to like try that out or get me used to it. So I was like a zombie during school, and then when I got out of it, I was just bouncing off the walls.
Yeah, those states must have been really tough for you to deal with as a kid, as well as, parents and your relationship with your moms.
Yeah, well, I mean, because my mom also has ADHD, which and so both of us knew this, but we didn't know what it meant other than we were just weird and had trouble paying attention.
Yeah, I think that this is when I remember about because I wasn't diagnosed till adulthood, and actually it was my kids' diagnoses that really brought it home for me. Although I do remember years before that, as a young woman, speaking to a therapist about family relationships, and ADHD was just kind of on the cusp of coming into people's attentions, and it was mostly to do with kids. And yet the therapist said, I wonder if your mother has ADHD, and sort of started describing some of the symptoms, but it was in a way that didn't really resonate for me, that this was maybe what my mom was dealing with. So I remember kind of shelving that and going, yeah, whatever. I mean, she's got her own stuff. I got my own stuff. I'm just going to deal with me right now. But I also remember parents being really upset about medicating. And there being a great deal of stigma around medicating your children, around how to medicate your children. I don't feel that mental health professionals or psychiatrists or psychologists or doctors were really super helpful with parents about dosage. Your option at the time, I think, was Ritalin. I think that was certainly the first medication available. And I don't think there was enough thought to dosage, timing of dosage, reasons for it, what kids could expect to experience
Yeah.
on it. And there was a great deal of moral panic and fear around it as well. You were going to stunt your children's growth. You were turning them into zombies by day. And there was also, this is the treatment we have.
Yeah.
So you're right. They weren't talking about what to do.
Yeah.
If you experience, like how to help your child develop tools to cope with studying, for example, or other strategies to help your child sit still. Or what about how your child feels about the diagnosis and how they feel about themselves as a student?
Mm-hmm.
So for my experience growing up, I learned to read really young. I was able to read at 4 because I didn't have the accompanying dyslexia that I say accompanying because often if you have ADHD, there's other what we call comorbidities, issues with reading and dyslexia. What I did have that went undiagnosed for most of my life was I have dyscalculia. So
yeah, you and I have talked about this, how we had the opposite of them.
Yeah. So I learned to read young, and at first that made it look like, I was just fine and I could sit still, especially if you gave me a book. So that was fine. But what I couldn't do was math, and you bet I couldn't sit still if I had to deal with math. And I remember learning the 5 times table and thinking, wow, this is awesome. 5, 10, 15, 25. This is like magic. How does that work? And really, really having trouble understanding really very basic ideas around numbers and math, which to this day, I've had to work really hard to kind of cope with that. So I think another strategy that doesn't get taught to kids is like, you can be really good at certain things and really focused around certain things, and you can still have ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
So, because what people would often say is like, oh, but if she's so quiet. If it was me, if I'd been dead, but she can sit still for hours. Like, how is this ADHD, right? So, because getting into some of the symptoms is this idea that isn't this about little boys who can't sit still, right?
Yep.
And so that's one of the misconceptions around ADHD. And we'll get into some of the other ones. But in terms of diagnosis, that's one of the big ones. So we will talk a little bit about misdiagnosis, how to look for symptoms of hyperactivity in adults, and what inattention looks like. So let's see. I want to try and stay focused.
The irony.
Right? Okay. So in terms of the symptoms, so there's distractibility or inattention, both of which are sort of related because you can be attending and then every little stimuli around you or every little thing can be a distraction.
Mm-hmm.
So pain can be a distraction, scratchy clothing can be a distraction, your socks can be a distraction. The table next to you, I went for dinner not so long ago with Eric, and I had a lot of trouble because there was someone a couple of tables down that was very excitedly describing their daughter's wedding in an extremely loud voice, in an excruciating detail. And I get it. He was proud, he was happy, but it was just like, I could not focus on my own meal. And it was sad. So there it is. So, yeah.
Symptoms.
Yes. Thank you.
Inattention and focus are, two of the probably most prevalent and I'm not going to say easy to spot, but like ones that are like that show up more often, especially like just in conversation while you're doing a streaming show, perhaps.
No, I'm not being my own example right now. Thank you, though. Wasn't me. Yes, absolutely. So I think distractibility and inattention are big ones. People don't always realize how much work they're doing to stay focused, because if this is your normal, what it can lead to is this idea that how come other people are coping so well? I'm just terrible at coping, or I'm lazy, or there's something really wrong with me. And so much of the experience for me anyway was like, through school and report cards is she lives in a world of her own. If she would just apply herself, this idea of sort of lack of discipline and laziness, of interests that come and go. So the idea of kind of, you're curious about everything. This is part of the tangential nature of our brains, and oh, shiny and this and that. And so you're interested in a lot of things, but it's the application.
Yeah.
So they can't apply themselves. Oh, what new fresh start is this? Or this new business that they want to start, or this new thing if it's an adult. Or if it's a kid, it's like, well, last week it was hockey, this week it's sewing. Like, what's going on, you know? So I can't tell what you need as a parent because you keep changing your mind, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So the ability to make plans.
Yeah. I'm thinking the stuff that you're talking about, though, like especially in childhood, like you're saying, like, oh, he was into this week and this that week. Like there was one Halloween where like I could not decide on a Halloween costume, and I like got one, and then I was like, no, I actually didn't want that one, I wanted this one, and then like I think I was definite on like 5 of them depending on the day, and I just remember driving my parents up the wall with that. And you know, now just trying to pick anything to do. It's so much easier as an adult sometimes.
Sometimes.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's this process for me of bringing myself back to maybe a goal I set. So, for instance, I often found shopping fun, but really quite overwhelming. So if I needed, I'm really quite into clothes. I like sewing them. I like looking at them, all this kind of thing. So I'd have to go with a plan in mind. And it was still easy to get distracted from that. But it's this idea of bringing yourself back to, okay, but what I really needed was a jacket or something. And this goes for grocery shopping too. I have to be like, okay, I'm on plan. Oh, but look what's fresh this week. And sometimes that's helpful because, yeah, I like fresh produce, but it's a matter of just kind of going, okay, but what we really needed was X thing. So again, with the process of dealing with the way impulsivity shows up for me, which is kind of wanting to be spontaneous, wanting to just kind of be in the moment. But then sometimes that means you're not really attending to your needs. Yeah.
Well, before we get into like how like, you know, it affects us and what we do with it, there's a lot of misconceptions about ADHD. I'm gonna pitch the first one off, which is the one that I hear so often, which is it's a superpower. And here's the thing. I understand that there are folks with ADHD who do feel like this and you know, like do see aspects of it being a superpower. It is different though when like someone that's neurotypical or something is just like, oh well, you know, it's awesome because it's a superpower for you. You can just you can just get so focused into something. It's like, well, I can't turn that on. If you know how I can focus that onto, if I could focus my hyperfocus, let me know, because then it will be a superpower. But until then,
sure,
I don't find it to be that.
100%. Again, the central issue is trouble regulating focus. I'm going to add challenges with controlling focus.
Yep.
So focus comes and goes. My job is to sort of corral myself in response to that and try and stay on task with whatever it is. But while there are things I can do to probably make it more likely that I can stay focused for a long time, not all of them are pretty. For instance, this issue of hyperfocus has sometimes meant I've been so into watching, doing, reading, whatever, something, I forget to eat.
Oh, yeah.
I forget to go to the bathroom. I forget to sleep. It can be 4 a.m. all of a sudden, and like Rip Van Winkle, I'm suddenly awake to my new and very sad reality that tomorrow 8 a.m. comes too early. And I have not taken care of my needs, and my shoulders are aching, or my back hurts, or whatever. So that's it. That's a huge issue. So while in a state, because see, we talk about things like flow or flow states, separate from ADHD. A flow state is when you're engaged in a creative process, and it feels like everything is just moving along naturally at a beautiful pace. And writers will sometimes talk about this happening now and again. But again, it's something that's really hard to control.
Yeah.
The ways in which you kind of control both your own attentional issues and even wanting to go into a flow state is usually by setting a routine. But with ADHD, it's really it can be quite challenging to set and keep to a routine.
Yep.
Unless the routine is set for you by outside forces, i.e., you have to take the kids to school at 8 and then you can come home and have your coffee and then right? Other people can regulate us pretty well, but that's a big ask, and we'll get into that.
Yes.
The relational aspect. So misconceptions, superpower. Another one is we've discussed, which is this capacity about sitting still, and misdiagnosis around ADHD, particularly with female-bodied people, because they don't necessarily have hyperactivity to the same degree. And I'm going to say, I don't think they have hyperactivity show up the same way necessarily, particularly not in adulthood. But that doesn't mean they don't have hyperactivity.
Yeah.
You know, I've got people in my life who will never go and see a movie if they can help it, unless under very specific circumstances, because sitting still for 2 to 2.5 hours, or even an hour and a half, without the capacity to get up and move around, as in a movie theater, they won't do it. Watching a movie at home where you can pause things, get up, take a break, totally fine. They might restrict how much they go out to dinner. Some people will restrict how they handle flights, or just plain not do long haul flights.
Yeah.
And this is all down to, I cannot sit still that long. So I think that it's an important piece to bring into this, because it's not about the same kind of fidgety ants and pants sort of thing that is very external and easy to see, but there might be tremendous internal distress around having to sit still. And as adults, we learn to discipline and also sometimes disconnect from our bodies in those ways. So there are definitely people who, even when seeking diagnosis, do not recognize the degree to which their own internal sense of hyperactivity, it doesn't look like typical hyperactivity, and they may say, no, that's not a problem. But they don't realize the ways in which they actually have managed their life in such a way for it not to be a problem, but that's created limits on their life too.
Yeah.
So another misconception is but everybody has trouble staying focused.
I've heard this about so many parts of ADHD, where it's just like, oh, well, everybody forgets things. Everybody has trouble staying focused. Everybody's a little fidgety. It's like, the one that like definitely will get my blood boiling, as if anyone is just like, oh, everyone's a little ADHD. No. I think one of the examples that I've given someone, because I was just, venting about, having a bad day with my ADHD, and someone was just like, oh, well, everyone forgets things. And I was like, cool. Do you forget things like 5 times within as many minutes? Do you forget what you have forgotten already? Like, you were like, I know I forgot something, and I don't know when I forgot it, and I don't know when I need to do it, but I know I forgot something. Like, it is these levels of memory problems with that, and how often they happen, that it changes it from like, well, yeah, people forget their keys. It's like, yeah, but do people forget their keys and then realize they forgot their wallet, and then realize they forgot to bring the thing that they had the entire trip planned around, and then went back inside and got a glass of water instead?
Exactly. And I think challenges, a lot of us know we forget things, and so we've put habits into place to make this less likely. So for me, my keys are always in the same place.
Yep.
They have to always be in the same place, because otherwise I will forget them. And if I've forgotten them or misplaced them, more to the point, they could be in the freezer for all I know.
Anywhere.
They could be anywhere. And that's one of the problems. It's really actually quite challenging to retrace my steps and figure out where I left it, because it is gone, And so misplacing of things, forgetting of things, rebuying groceries, even if your pantry is disorganized, um, the replacing expensive things like glasses sometimes or jackets. So this can be really challenging for people.
Yeah.
And I think it's often minimized.
Mm-hmm.
But this sort of thing is a careless error, which is also very common to ADHD. You kind of have to really watch when you do things. Paperwork, for instance. I've inevitably, when filling out paperwork or forms, signed my name in the wrong place where the date's supposed to go, for example, because I'm just not paying quite enough attention. I've done less well on exams because of careless mistakes. And so I've really had to learn to find ways around that.
Yeah.
Which for the most part have been successful. But I will say that until you realize that, oh, this is ADHD and I'm doing it, and here's some strategies to cope with it, it can be pretty tough. So, yeah.
You made me remember during that my friend and I were signing a thing, and I wrote my name and I wrote my address, and then he went and did it, and then I looked at it and he had signed his name and written my address. He also has ADHD, and I was just like, what?
And back in the day of paper forms, this was really tough because maybe you'd have to truck off to the office again and get another copy or something. Or certainly I've had to reprint forms and be like, oh God, I just, or cross things out. And there's a side of me that's really quite perfectionist and gets really fed up with this sort of thing. So whiteout tape and things like that to sort of just cope with it. But it's super annoying. I think that we need to speak briefly, at least, about time management, because in my life, I've lost friendships through this. And luckily, none of it's recent. But years ago, when I really didn't know what was going on, I'd be late for work or late for school. I'd miss classes because of it. Because, once you're 20 minutes late, do you really want to walk in? And if the class is only an hour, is it really worth it? This is the sort of thing I would tell myself. And because ADHD comes along with sometimes for people, depression or anxiety, there could then be additional anxiety about time management or additional anxiety about walking into a classroom late.
Yeah. Well, like that was always the funny thing with my mom and I, and this has been instilled in me as well, is like we were always early to everything. Like it was always a matter of like, okay, no, we're leaving a half hour early. How far away is it? No, make that an hour early. And we were always there before the time. Like if it wasn't 15 minutes before, we were late in our opinion. And like we've essentially come to realize it's like, oh yeah, as a young kid, like time management trauma was like thrown on her hard. And so that's why as an adult, she was always like that. And I am now like that as well, of like, we don't want people to perceive that we are bad with time management or anything. So we are going to make it, even if we are just like causing the situation to become more stressful, to be there early.
Yeah. And I do find that for me is time stress. It's been a godsend to be able to work online as well, because it really helps in terms of controlling time issues for me. But yeah, I'd say that I didn't realize, because I think, again, if you have ADHD, this is just your normal, that other people didn't struggle as much with time.
Yeah.
And so as well, not to my benefit, to my relationship's benefit, I was resentful when they got so mad at me for being late, because I thought they should understand that we all struggle with time.
Yeah.
And that was not the case. And this was actually, became a bigger issue because I come from a culture which is kind of lax about time.
Mm.
And I'm Canadian now, but my point is, in my formative years, I grew up in a South Asian environment where people are just like, eh. So, for instance, if you go to a wedding and they say, 8:00, don't expect that the actual ceremony will be taking place at 8, or the dinner will be served, at 8, or anything like that. It won't happen. You'll probably eat at 11. And so unlike so that was also a factor, but I'm still responsible, obviously, for my ADHD and my time management. But it was interesting to consider what sorts of things that I personally was taking for granted that kind of ran some of the excuses I made around time.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of the loss of friendship, I remember feeling really resentful, actually, which was not helpful and did not allow me to take responsibility for my behavior.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, obviously it had the opposite effect. I kind of held a grudge that it was such a big deal.
Yeah.
And I wasn't as understanding as I should have been. Sorry, these are falling out. 1 second.
It's all good.
Small ears. Okay. So I think that this was kind of an interesting learning process. And now I'm much more empathic of the other person's experience, but part of it was understanding that my experience was different than theirs, which is the point, really. It's harder if we think people should understand,
mm-hmm.
and they shouldn't.
Yeah.
It's not their responsibility to take care of our dysfunction, whatever it is. It's our responsibility to take responsibility for our dysfunction. To start with, we have to realize we have one.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So like the next section that we had was like how it affects us. And I do feel like we've been talking about this as we've been going, but there's a few things that we have here that we haven't touched yet. One of them is masking. And this one I do think is a good part of ADHD to talk about, because it is definitely something you can be doing and not notice you are doing it. And it definitely, well, not definitely, it does stem from the societal expectation of being normal and trying and being able to fit in and pretending to do that. Why don't you talk a bit about masking? You can do a better job of explaining that than I can.
Oh, I think you've made a really good start there. Yeah, I think that particularly if you grow up feeling like there's something not quite okay about you, other people, for instance, are getting schoolwork done. For me, this really didn't line up, for example, because there were some things I was really excellent at and top of the class, anything to do with literature or writing or reading, I'm up there. But so abysmal at other things that it was hard to make sense of what was going on. And if you're seen as smart, especially as a kid, and you're rewarded as smart, then you're probably going to learn to mask smart. And the problem with masking smart for me is I had a really hard time understanding why I was struggling, for instance, with math, or why it was so hard for me to focus on the extremely boring history class when last term's history class was so great and I had no trouble at all. And I certainly went to a school, and at a time in history too, I'd say, where people weren't thinking about how to teach effectively necessarily, as much as they were thinking about how to just get the information across, and you really ought to memorize it and learn it, and everybody else seemed to be fine. And so this prevented me from getting help, is where I'm going with this. And that's one of the challenges of masking, because if your reality is that you mask, you think everyone else does it, because to some degree we do. To some degree we have personas in public. We have ways of behaving in public situations that are the norms and values and mores of the culture in which we are. And if you have ADHD, in some ways, it's an extreme of that around certain things, which makes it really hard to figure out that doesn't everyone. So if I'm in a noisy or busy environment, say I'm at a restaurant with a few other people and you've got wedding planner over there chatting or whatever,
got Martin Short from Father of the Bride over there just talking about all the weddings.
Right. If I'm with really good friends, I'll be like, hey, I'm really sorry. I'm super distracted by this. But as an adult, we're not supposed to get distracted, right? So certainly for years before I knew I was masking, I would just pretend to hear. I would just pretend that, oh, yeah, nod and smile, say yes. what did I agree to? So and it was exhausting
Yeah.
because when you're doing that, it's also an additional mental load. You're behaving normal, you're corralling all your tangents. Some people get totally quiet when they're masking with ADHD because it's like, I can't say half the things I'm thinking. And I shouldn't be thinking, I'm trying to stay focused on whatever someone's saying. And in my head, I'm going into a million tangents. So I'm trying to control for all that while also eating a meal, while also trying not to get distracted by not just my own internal tangents, but the
Yeah.
external, you know. This is why you'll never see me wear shapewear. I
Oh,
mean,
because it's too big of a distraction.
can you imagine like everything? Oh God, is this rolling up the wrong way? Like, do I really need that on top of everything else I'm dealing with?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, so masking can be, I would often do it at work and not now, thank goodness, because I don't have to. I love working with clients. It really engages my attention. But I would say that certainly appearing to be focused and attentive and listening was a really tough thing. Took a
Yes.
lot of extra energy. It was exhausting by the time you got home, you were done.
Yeah.
Not much left over for relationships there. So,
I do want to give us some time towards the end to talk about like ways that we handle this. So I do,
mm-hmm.
looking at what we have here, I do think that one of the points that I want to hit for like things that we have struggled with is the thinking about behaviors related to ADHD as habits I can break. Because this was the thing for me that really hit when we started doing the show, and you, me, Dr. B were talking about it, and y'all were telling me more about ADHD. Is that before that I knew I had ADHD, didn't really know what that meant, so I did think that all of these things that I am struggling with was just bad habits, bad, not being able to manage my time, not being able to manage, the things that I have promised to do, or, things that I need to remember to do, and all of that stuff. And so I looked into all of I looked up so many ways of like, get a planner, make a list, do this, do that. And none of them worked for me. And like, it really was getting to like the point where it was just beating me down every time I would buy a planner, because I was like, this is going to be the time that it works. It wasn't the time it worked.
New leaf.
But when
new me.
when we all started talking and you all started telling me more about ADHD, and so I looked into it more. I watched, videos on YouTube talking about, with people giving talks about ADHD, watched Jess's how to ADHD.
Absolutely.
Learning that those weren't habits I could break, like, really broke me. Like, I had a breakdown about that, because it was almost this, like, I don't even know the proper way to kind of convey this. It was like a grief of constant failure, and like knowing that all of those were bound to fail, and that there wasn't an easy solution that I could just do to help with these. Like, it broke me down for a while.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really difficult. And I think until you know, Jess's How to ADHD, which by the way is a fantastic YouTube channel and a
Yes.
wonderful resource. And Dr. Russ Barkley talking about ADHD and a few other experts who are really well grounded in the science. I think that this idea of get a planner, get a this, get a that, this idea that these are things that should work, quote
Yeah.
unquote, should, um, left a lot of people with ADHD feeling like they just needed to figure out what their habits would be. And of course, many books on discipline and effective, the sort of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People or whatever,
Yeah.
or even books like Atomic Habits, which does have some really good tools actually, but even other stuff around habit formation, planning, bullet journals, all of that stuff can be really difficult to consistently implement. And that's partly because we get bored. And the same strategies don't always work for the same person at different times, or even at the same kinds of times. So part of it is finding ways to kind of keep it fresh for you. And part of it is also engaging in a deeper understanding of your own experience of ADHD. And this is where I think therapy can be incredibly helpful because it's tailored to you. We talk a lot about mental health issues on this show, but of course, we're not able to specifically deal with any person's individual context. So I think that finding tailored strategies for you and also recognizing that it's not a failure if one strategy stops working.
Yeah.
And it may actually be that you can restart that particular strategy.
Yeah.
And it may be important to look at if a strategy isn't working, are you trying to change too many things at once? Or is it a particularly difficult point in your life where you're trying to change all the things? How much pressure are you putting on yourself to make things work? You have to work with yourself rather than against yourself, as we talked about last week.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, that I think that's a good a segue over to how strategies that we use for ourselves. But before I do that, I do want to shout out Dr. B is in the chat right now. Hey, Dr. B, it's good to see you. I hope you're having a good time.
Yeah.
If y'all are new to the show, Dr. B is hosts on episodes before this, and we wish him and Jess a lovely time with their new precious little baby.
Bebe bring up all kinds of additional wonderful issues and transition to parenthood stuff that is wonderful and challenging. And I will say, life transitions, it's really important to recognize that these can challenge our capacity to cope with our ADHD, or really to cope with anything that we had. I had a thing that worked, but now I'm waking up every 2 or 3 hours at night. Good luck with that. So being kind to yourself as well in terms of coping with your ADHD is important, and finding ways to kind of both share a diagnosis with people who maybe need to learn to know about it, but also take responsibility for it at the same time, so that it doesn't become something you're sort of putting other people in the position of dealing with, while at the same time recognizing that here's some things I'm doing to cope with it. How can I support the situation that I'm in to still effectively do my part and support other people? So, yeah.
Also, Dr. B posted Dr. Daddy. I am now going to call you that when we meet in person. So, Mitra, what is a... well, I do want to put the preface on this before, and I believe we said this earlier in the episode. These are strategies that we have found work for us. This is not an answer for you. It is the reason why we're talking about this is because we do feel that it is good for folks with ADHD to talk about strategies that they have, so other people can have an idea of what might help them. But it is not a guaranteed fix for you, or even gonna work for you at all. But I do think it is a good conversation to have with folks. So, Mitra, what is something that helps you with your ADHD?
So one of the things that has helped me in the past, because it's true, it does change all the time. One of the things that consistently helps me, if I can look at my schedule for the day, and I have made this a habit. So when I wake up, I check my schedule, I check my email. I try to check the times that I'm supposed to be places and do things. Treavor knows this. It doesn't always work, but do my best here. Because if I can check and kind of get in the mindset of what is it I really need to accomplish today, then it really helps me order my thoughts. And I'd say that's the first thing. And my husband's learned to do this for me as well, which is to say, I need the paperwork for this by this time, or don't forget you need to do X thing. In the past, I used to get quite defensive around the don't forgets and stuff, but this is partly because that's a journey. So thing one, recognize you have ADHD, and recognize you need additional strategies to cope and do things. And recognize the same strategy won't work every time. So a strategy I found really useful to get into habits was a online kind of journal / mood tracker. You could put in your goals, and then you could just, it was really easy with just a click of a little button or two to kind of enter that. And that was called Dalio.
Yeah.
And I used it when I was getting into the habit of taking medication, and I was also trying to handle my sleep. And I wanted to track my mood so that I could see just how much sleep, more or less, was then affecting mood, better or worse. So I found that really useful, and I still use it from time to time. As I incorporated other kinds of tracking and stuff, I stopped using it, but I still find it to be a really useful mood plus activity tracker. So I would say mood, activity, habit, if you can get that into one tracker, that can be incredibly useful, particularly when you're trying to put new changes or routines into place. So if you're trying to add fitness, or if you're trying to get better with sleep, you're trying to eat better, any of those things. So that's been really useful for me. Mm-hmm.
Looking at the list that I have, definitely gonna. I think one of them that I want to talk about is fidget toys and loops. I call loops because that's what the brand that I have, but it's just earplugs, stuff that helps me when I'm at my desk, when I'm out and about, when I'm having bad sensory times. I've now found ways to kind of have fidget toys around me when I'm like in a meeting. I've got something that I can fiddle with here at my desk. On my phone now, I have I have the pop sockets, and I found out that they have these new ones that have spinners. And so this has been my new mobile like fidget toy, where I'm just standing there and I have my hand in my pocket and I'm just spinning this as I'm talking. And that has been a big help because it is taking all this fidgety energy and it's giving it something to focus on. There's the fidget cubes. There's I can't remember some of the names of the other ones, but if you go online, you can find some pretty good ones. Amazon, you need to do some specific searching. The ones that come up when you just search fidget toys are okay, but loops. These have been so good for when I'm out, because they're just little earplugs that you can still hear pretty well through. But it cuts out a lot of the background noise. I have the fancy ones where you can actually set like what level you want it to be on of cutting out background noise. But I didn't realize how much being in a extremely crowded place really did just send me everywhere. And so being able to walk around with those now, I can be more present and attentive.
Yeah, those are a really interesting idea. I have often continued to wear AirPods even when they're not on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it might be having the same purpose. Like usually they're letting sound through, but they are kind of dimming the background.
Yeah.
So yeah, if it works for you and if you find sound to be particularly distracting, then that's something to look into. There are a number of different ear plug or ear sort of things that dampen sound a bit that can be quite handy. Interestingly enough, I'll often find certain kinds of distraction really useful for staying focused. So for instance, when I was writing my thesis, I found doing that in coffee shops was really great. Nobody was hanging around or speaking to me specifically. And if it was during the day, it's not like the noise would raise to a, particularly high level. And if I could be in a familiar one, having a familiar thing, it kept me focused. Whereas being at home meant I could go sit on the couch, and there were just too many distractions because by the time I was doing my thesis, I had kids.
One that I did I've been doing for a little bit now is if I'm having trouble focusing while reading, this is so weird, I go to YouTube and I look up cafe vlogs, and it is literally just someone that works at a cafe. They put their camera down and it's just them making drinks, and you can kind of hear people in the background, and I just have that on, and somehow it helps me focus on what I am reading better. But what is another strategy that you have, Mitra?
I will often use videos, not related to what I'm doing, but videos, sometimes how to ADHD, in fact, while I'm cooking or doing something else. Because there are certain activities, folding laundry, cooking familiar things, where I really do know what I'm doing, and it's not actually quite engaging enough to keep me focused. Like if I'm cooking under those circumstances where mostly it's chopping vegetables, for example, then I go downstairs to the fridge to get something else. I've probably forgotten why I was there. So if I have something that anchors me in terms of interest, it helps me get through more tedious tasks.
Mm-hmm.
I will, for instance, often listen to a podcast or an audiobook while driving familiar places or while vacuuming or something.
Yeah.
So I think that specific kinds of distraction can be really helpful.
For sure.
We had a question about diagnosis, and I wanted to bring up the idea that it's important to not self-diagnose, but there are screening tools. Russ Barkley, Dr. Russell Barkley, recently posted a video with very comprehensive screening questions around ADHD. This may be useful to take a look at for some people who are wondering about if they're dealing with ADHD. As always, it's great to consult with a therapist or other professional. Therapists don't typically diagnose, but they will help you in terms of the kinds of questions about how you're doing in your life and what is your experience with inattention, hyperactivity, etc. Do you find it's impairing your life in some way? And that can be really useful, as well as a referral perhaps to someone who can help with that. So
yeah.
Okay, Dr. B, I'm glad to hear that you're supporting
Dr. B says my baby gets $1 in her college fund every time you both mention Jessica's channel. How to ADHD, go watch it.
Yeah, I think I have certainly found that it helps people to kind of feel accompanied, which is another resource actually, or another coping strategy, is to recognize hopefully that you're not alone in your experience, and that there are now, I think certainly in the last few years, better resources out there to help you cope with your ADHD and help you feel that validated in your experience of it. So
I do have the question here. This is from Malifia. Oh, I'm gonna mess up that last name. I apologize. I'm gonna go with Malifia. But one of the part of their question is, but I'm wondering if a diagnosis will actually help me. That is up to you, and that's something that I feel like that is not our place to tell you if that will help you. You kind of need to do some soul searching on your own. I know for folks it has, and I know for folks there are ones that are like, I don't want to know, and they're perfectly fine with that. So that's got to be something that you decide if that will help for you.
Because you can actually use screening, like you can use a screening tool that can help you recognize that, oh, maybe I do have some additional challenges with focus and paying attention. And then you can just go to some of the tools for that. So it's really harder to say whether a formal diagnosis is worth going through. And it's very, very context dependent.
Yep.
I would say that tools are always handy. Even if you don't have ADHD, but you notice you're going through a time in your life where it's harder to focus or organize yourself, then hey, there's tools out there that are really useful, and they can apply to anyone who just happens to need them. Yep. So yeah, that's a very personal question. If you're considering it, then research on that and soul search on that will also help you with making a decision.
100%. So. We got to start getting out of here because we've got a show coming up after this. Mitra, if people want to find you and what you do on the interwebs, where could they do so?
People can find me at Mitra Jordan at the site that was formerly called, had a little blue bird and now has a big fat and of course, I am at mitrajordan.com, or should I say my website is mitrajordan.com, and you can find me there as well. Yeah. So
I do want to say here real quick, yeah, we're going to be doing 2 more episodes about ADHD coming up in the next couple weeks. So if that is a topic that interests you, come back and hang out and post and chat. Yeah, that you can follow me on all of those dystopian social medias at the Treavor. There is an A hiding in there. And shout out again, Dr. B. Thank you for being in the chat today. Go buy Jess's book and go watch How to ADHD. The book is also How to ADHD. Put all those dollars in that baby's college account. That's going to do it for this week's episode. So until next week, take care of yourself. Bye.
Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.
Champions of Psychology is meant as education and entertainment. It is not a substitute for medical advice or professional counseling. Discussion of mental health topics will be primarily rooted in research and the personal experiences and self-disclosures of the hosts. While we can provide generalized education and possible mental health resources, we cannot offer any recommendations, advice, or opinions for any specific persons, cases, or situations. We provide these resources and links at our sole discretion, but have not necessarily vetted or reviewed any resource. We assume no liability for the use of the information or resources on these sites, and we encourage you to use your own best judgment.